You don't usually hear about the people who almost disappear, because nothing technically happens to them. They wake up, they drive away, and they spend the rest of their lives thinking about how close they came. This story isn't about a crime that made headlines. It's about a mistake that thousands of exhausted people make every night, and the small number of people who know how to exploit it. If you've ever pulled over because you were too tired to keep driving, you need to hear this. I want to be very clear before this story starts. Nothing you're about to hear was exaggerated. Nothing was added for shock value. And none of what happened was unique to one place. This story is built from real police reports, documented encounters, and patterns that have appeared across multiple states over several years. Different people, different locations, same mistake. They believed sleeping in a locked car was safe. It isn't. If you've ever pulled over because you were too tired to drive, if you've ever thought, I'll just close my eyes for a bit, you need to hear this. Because what happened here didn't start with violence. It started with silence. Sleeping in your car has been normalized for years. Truck drivers do it. Van lifers do it. Even police departments recommend it over driving while exhausted. But what rarely gets mentioned is how vulnerable it makes you. When you're parked, you're predictable. When you're asleep, you're disoriented. And when you wake up suddenly, your reaction time is slow. In rural areas, especially long highway corridors with few exits, that vulnerability has been exploited repeatedly. Not by chance. By design. The people responsible don't rely on force. They rely on exhaustion. In late autumn, a man I'll call Evan was driving cross-country for work. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't unprepared. He was just behind schedule. By the time he crossed into a sparsely populated stretch of highway, it was already well past midnight. No open hotels. No rest stops. Just farmland and darkness stretching for miles. When he finally pulled off the road, it wasn't part of the plan. It was because he physically couldn't stay awake anymore. The spot looked safe enough. A wide gravel pull-off used by truckers. No buildings nearby. Nothing but open land. Evan parked near the edge, angled outward so he could leave quickly if needed. Doors locked. Seat reclined. Phone plugged in. Before closing his eyes, he did what almost everyone does. He checked his mirrors. There were no other cars. No headlights. No movement. And with that small reassurance, he fell asleep. Evan never knew how long he slept. What woke him wasn't a noise. It was the feeling of being watched. His eyes snapped open, and immediately he noticed something was wrong. The inside of the car wasn't completely dark anymore. A shadow was blocking the moonlight through the windshield. Someone was standing directly in front of the vehicle. Not moving. Not shifting. Just standing there. First, Evan thought he was still dreaming. That half-awake state where your brain tries to explain things before panic kicks in. Then came the sound. A soft tap. Not on the window. On the roof of the car. Just once. He held his breath, hoping it was a tree branch or falling debris, even though there were no trees nearby. Then it happened again. Tap. Tap. Slow. Deliberate. Like someone testing to see if he was awake. Evan didn't move. Because moving would mean admitting this was real. And whatever was outside seemed very patient. The tapping stopped. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. A voice came from the passenger side. Calm. Friendly. Too friendly. Hey, you okay in there? It was said the way people talk when they already know the answer. Evan stayed silent. Part of him thought, maybe if I don't respond, they'll assume no one's inside. Which, in hindsight, is an incredibly optimistic thought to have while sitting in a car with fogged-up windows. The voice didn't leave. Instead, it moved closer. Evan finally turned his head. The man outside leaned toward the glass, trying to look in without pressing his face against it. Casual posture. Hands visible. Everything about him screamed, "See? I'm harmless." Which is usually a red flag. The man smiled. Not a big smile. Not a threatening one. Just enough to be unsettling. "No rush," he said quietly. "I just wanted to make sure you weren't dead or anything." A perfectly normal sentence. Said by a perfectly normal man. At nearly 3 in the morning. The man straightened up and took a step back. For a second, Evan thought that was it, that the encounter was over. Then the man reached for the passenger door handle. Not fast, not aggressive, just a gentle pull, like someone checking a hotel room they thought was theirs. It didn't open. The man frowned, just slightly, like the door had made a rude suggestion. "That's probably for the best," he said quietly, which is not something you want to hear from a stranger who's just tested your car door. The man took another step back, raising his hands. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said. "I've seen people freeze to death out here." That sounded helpful, almost caring. But Evan noticed something strange. There were no tire tracks nearby, no headlights in the distance, which meant this man hadn't just arrived. He'd been. Evan reached for his phone, pretending to check the time. 2:47 a.m. That's when the man casually stepped out of view. Not walking away, just far enough to disappear from the passenger side mirror. That was the moment Evan's stomach dropped, because anyone who understands blind spots understands cars. And Evan suddenly realized he was no longer dealing with curiosity. He was dealing with intent. The gravel crunched behind the car. Once, then again. Another set of footsteps. Slow, unhurried. Like whoever it was didn't need to rush, because Evan wasn't going anywhere. Yet. This is where people like to imagine they'd stay calm. They wouldn't. Evan's brain started doing math it didn't want to solve. 2 people. 1 car. 0 witnesses. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a system. And Evan was the variable that had just shown up. Evan turned the key. The engine exploded to life in the silence. Headlights flooded the pull-off. And now he could see them both. One at the passenger side. One directly behind the car. Neither looked surprised, which somehow made everything worse. Evan slammed the car into drive and hit the accelerator. Gravel sprayed everywhere. The car fishtailed, corrected, and shot back onto the highway. In the rearview mirror, he saw something that still bothers him years later. Neither man chased him. They just stood there, watching, like this wasn't the first time it hadn't worked. Evan drove for nearly an hour before stopping. He found a police station that was still open and walked in looking exactly like someone who had almost made a very bad decision. The officer listened without interrupting, then sighed, which is never a comforting response. The officer told Evan that stretch of highway had multiple reports. Same approach, same calm voices, same lack of vehicles, people sleeping in cars, people vanishing, and just enough survivors to know it wasn't random. Crimes like this don't rely on violence. They rely on exhaustion, on people convincing themselves that nothing will happen, because most of the time, nothing does, until it does. So if you're tired, if your eyes start to close, if you tell yourself you'll just rest for a minute, don't, because the people who look for parked cars at night are very good at one thing: waiting. Most people hear stories like this and tell themselves it was bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. But patterns don't happen by accident. If you travel long distances, if you drive at night, if you've ever thought, "I'll just rest for a bit," remember this story, because the people who look for parked cars don't need you to make noise. They just need you to stop. If you want to hear more real stories like this, the ones that don't always make the news, you know where to find them. Just maybe don't listen alone tonight.